You know Alison is always fermenting weird and strange things, but when she told me she was fermenting trash, it was a new level. I had to know more. A little over a year ago, when we were recording an episode, Alison offhand mentioned something she called Bokashi. After we finished recording, I asked her, what was that? It turns out that Bokashi is the Japanese word for compost, and Alison had purchased a tool that she used to ferment her food waste. Bones, peels, fat scraps, anything that she didn't use or that had gone bad, into compost tea and compost, which she was using in her porch garden. As you have seen on her Instagram, she produced some incredible vegetables with the help of that nutrient-dense, lacto-fermented nutritional support for her plants. In this episode, Alison and I will explain the process of fermenting waste, the inoculant that is used to ferment the food waste, and then we will actually interview the US and Canada supplier that makes the 2-bucket system that Alison and I use. They also very graciously created a code for the US and Canada podcast listeners to get the same kit we use at a discount. This episode will answer all your questions for those of you trying to produce compost tea or compost for your garden or porch garden, or find clean, ethical, but also non-smelly ways to deal with the food scraps. And then after you finish this episode, you can get about your day fermenting your trash.
Welcome to the Ancestral Kitchen Podcast with Alison, a European town dweller in central Italy, and Andrea, living on a newly created family farm in Northwest Washington State, USA. Pull up a chair at the table and join us as we talk about eating, cooking, and living with ancient ancestral food wisdom in a modern world kitchen.
Hey Alison, how's it going over there?
Good, Andrea. Feels like a long time since we spoke. Lots of podcast work going on, but
I know.
I'm glad to connect with you again today.
Yeah, no, this is awesome. We have finally gotten rain over here.
Wow.
Late for us. I mean, not unheard of, but later than usual. So it's been rainy and sloggy outside, which is kind of nice because Hannah and I started doing gaps. And as you know, you basically live on soup for a while. And it just feels so right. Like it's rainy, it's cold, and it's all we want anyways. We don't even want anything else.
It's not quite there yet here. The sun is absolutely blastingly warm this afternoon, but it's really foggy in the mornings, and the new olive oil is here and the grape harvest is over and things are certainly turning. So I'm feeling it. Have you had your breakfast yet this morning?
Yeah, I actually had soup. Everybody, I got so many messages on Instagram because I posted a picture of soup and I said it was breakfast soup. And I just meant I was having soup for breakfast. But everybody was like, what is breakfast soup? And I was like, oh, soup that you eat for breakfast. So I realized I should have probably defined it better when I shared that. But I am finding how incredibly convenient it is because you chop, you dice, you mix everything up. You don't have to saute anything for gaps because it just all boils. But everything goes in the pot and we can start it anytime during the day. And then we leave it on the back burner on a low simmer. And then in the morning you wake up and walk out and there it is, fresh, hot
warm
soup. And I put sour cream in mine, like a blob right in the middle. We're on stage 2 right now. So a little extra dairy coming in, and then a handful of sauerkraut. It's pretty much a perfect breakfast. So
sounds delicious.
Wow. And it was really good. Like there's beef from my neighbor's cows and turkey from our turkeys and broth from roasting one of our chickens. And what else? Shredded carrots. Pumpkins. We went to a pumpkin festival or not a pumpkin festival, but just like a fall festival. And there's this huge pumpkin that
the chef had carved this face into, and he was there carving it when we were there, kind of like as the entertainment a little bit. And there was these giant chunks that he was pulling out of the pumpkin, to make the face. And so I told Gary, I said,
know what's
I want
coming.
those chunks. I want those chunks. You would have done the same thing, Alison. Because they're probably just going to go in the trash, right?
Yeah.
So it was like at this big resort, and what are they going to do with it? Like, they're not going to use it in their kitchen. They probably can't even legally use it in their kitchen. So, Gary asked him, hey, can we have those? And he was like, yeah, sure. That'd be great. Enjoy.
Nice.
So now it's coming next, Alison. We put some of that into the soup, but then we're blending the rest of it up for what? Stage 3 pancakes.
Yeah, pancakes. Wow, you've got to keep enough for that. You've got to make them really big as well.
I told Hannah, I was like, what Alison said? And she was like, of course Alison did that. She tried to make it as big as she could.
I couldn't help it. I did so many of them that by the time I could have made one in one of those big paella dishes that you see in Spain that feeds like 80 people. I reckon I could have made a pancake that big.
Yeah, I can just see you get the spin, and then flip it over. The crowd goes wild. Did you eat, Alison?
Yeah. We had beef heart, and it's just so wonderful. We cooked it last weekend. It's today's Thursday, and I kept a lot of it in the fridge afterwards, but I also froze a chunk of it, maybe like I don't know, a fifth of the heart, and it comes out of the freezer so well. You would never imagine that it had been frozen. So I just got it out the freezer, sliced it, and we had some broccoli kind of vegetable thing left over from yesterday, which was onions and garlic and broccoli and chard and red pepper. And then I put a kind of threw some spices in, coriander seeds and cumin. And I put some of my ginger bug in it. I've taken to doing that recently. And some other spices, and that was left over from yesterday. Oh, it really makes a difference. I don't know why. It's better than just grating fresh ginger in, and it's in the fridge all the time, so it's just there.
No, I was just thinking that, like, that would taste even better. I mean, fresh ginger is great, but fermented, it pops more. So
that was cold, but was nice. And then I had sourdough spelt, or I've had sourdough rye with lard on, some salt on the top, and some sauerkraut.
That's
really
perfect.
Good. Yeah,
sounds
really,
like we
really
both
nice.
had a good kind of fall lunch.
Indeed.
Yeah. So do you have?
Yeah, I've got something to read.
Yeah, I was going to ask
in
if you
front
had
of
that.
me, and it's staring at me in front of me. I want to turn my computer off and just concentrate on talking to you, so I'm going to read it. It's from someone who is a listener and who is also on Instagram. Her handle on Instagram is Wolf Daughter Darling, and her name's Ester. And it's just such a wonderful thing, and I felt I resonated with it, being the person, who's half of the podcast, let alone someone who's listening, and I wanted to read it. And so Esther nicely said we could. And so thank you very much for saying this, Esther. I will read it so people can hear. She says, I've been lovingly binging every episode of your podcast, and it is marvellous how much impetus it gives me to trudge through the awkward bottleneck of shifting actions to align with long-held values. It's so painful feeling like a hypocrite and experiencing that dissonance of how I wish to feed myself and those around me, yet the debilitating challenge it is to actually cut and run from convenience and the efficiency economy of industrial food networks. I have a long way to go, I'm only just starting, but your presence and pod has truly given me a crutch to return to when I find myself feeling overwhelmed. At the end of the day, my body has brought me here, clearly and lovingly showing me what is aligned and how to live with integrity and joy and sovereignty. Thank you for what you're doing. And just, I really felt for that, because I recognise that dissonance of feeling like, I want to do this, but it's so hard. And if one of our episodes can just give a little help to smooth over that dissonance and give the impetus to move past it and move on with it, that brings me a lot of joy. Thank you ever so much, Ester.
Yes, that was well said. And will listeners have your most recent interview by the time this episode comes out, Alison?
No, I don't think so. I think it's going to be
okay.
after this one.
I feel like when you talk in that interview about making everything accessible to everyone and all of us feeling like we're part of it, that she kind of touched on that nerve right there. Like, I don't want to be a hypocrite. In my head, this is how I want to live. In real life, this is where I'm at. But that's part of just recognizing that you're not a hypocrite. You're on the path, you know?
You're feeling it, you know. I think it's so easy to use what we have around us in our modern day society to push those uncomfortable feelings down, you know, where we could just go shopping or eat or watch television or do something that's even worse for us. And actually feeling those feelings, once you're there, that is such a big part of the change
You're no
process.
longer oblivious. You're not in the ignorance is bliss stage anymore. You're in the knowledge is power stage. That was very well said. I'm really glad that that she said you could read that.
Yeah.
And if you guys have thoughts also on the pod, drop them in the reviews on Spotify or iTunes. It's insane now that the more I'm learning about podcasts, how much of a difference it makes to a podcast. Like if you have reviews. So yeah, drop them in there. And Alison and I, we read, we screenshot, we send them back and forth to each other.
Yeah.
We see them all and they mean a lot to us. So don't think that they're just going some mindless place where some like staffer, Alison or your staffer is going to check it for you. No, it's me and Alison checking it. We're like,
I have mice that do it in the night.
Yeah. Oh, that'd be nice. All right, Alison. What's next? Let's move on to
today's episode.
Yeah. Let's talk about what we're actually going to talk about. So, Alison, you've mentioned this before, Bokashi. And the first time you said it in passing. And I was like, what did you just... I'm sorry, that is a word I don't know. And then I think I asked you about it after we recorded. I don't even remember when that was. And then we talked about it more on another episode. I don't remember if it was a Patreon episode or a regular podcast episode, but it's such a brilliant way of using food waste. And I know you love fermenting, but you're taking a little bit far with fermenting your trash. However,
it's the next step.
I love that. I love that you do that. So maybe you can say a little bit about what Bokashi is, explain it how you explained it to me, and we can tell everybody all the good stuff that we have for them.
Yeah. Okay.
Sweet.
So, Bokashi has filled a number of holes in my life that I felt that dissonance around that we were talking about from Ester. I have a very small garden that is container only. I don't have any soil access to the ground. And I love to garden in the little space I can do that in. And on our second year being in this apartment, I bought bags of compost to put in my pots. And there were a lot of bags. I mean, they were a lot of litres each, and I think I had to buy 8 massive bags of compost. And since then, I've bought more pots. And getting that compost was hard work. We don't have a car, so we had to go to the garden centre, buy it, get them to bring it out. And then I'm putting the compost into the pots, and I'm throwing away the plastic bags that the compost is in. And knowing that compost can exhaust itself over one season, I thought, well, have I got to do this again next year, really? I don't want to go and buy more compost. I don't want to to have an industry making compost for me,
Yeah.
and I don't want to be bringing that plastic into the world. There must be some other way to deal with this. And I heard about Bokashi. And at the beginning, I was completely confused. I didn't understand, like you, I didn't understand what it was.
Yeah, so was I.
I heard the terms fermenting, the term composting was in there, the term EM was in there. It was something to do with lactobacillus, and I just didn't get it at all. So I did a lot of research. I listened to webinars, I read blog posts, I read books. It took me a while to kind of get my head around exactly how Bokashi worked and how it might help me in my garden and in my kitchen. And then about a year and a half ago, I took the plunge and bought 2 Bokashi buckets. And we, having spoken to Bokashi companies in the last kind of 6 months preparing for this, we've managed to get a discount for customers for these buckets that
I'm stoked about that.
use. And we will give details of that when I finish talking. So these 2 buckets are
I'm just kidding.
are upcycled plastic. And what I do is I collect my food waste, just like you might collect it for composting, but you're able to ferment more with composting than you can with Bokashi than you can with composting. So there are certain foodstuffs that you can't put in your compost outside, which I don't have room for anyway, that you can put in the Bokashi. So on a daily basis, I'm collecting all of my scraps, my peelings, the stems for things if I'm not eating them, my eggshells, little bones, tiny bits of food that are kind of left on a plate, any waste meat, anything cheese, little tiny bits of cheese, tea grinds, coffee grinds, chocolate shells. It just goes on and on. All of that I collect, and at the end of the day, I put it in this bucket, and I then sprinkle a bran over the top, which has been inoculated with something called EM, which we have an interview a bit later on, which is much more scientific than my home talk here, which will explain what EM is, because that was hard to get my head around to start with. So I sprinkle that on, squash it down, put the lid back on my bucket, and then do the same over and over again. So I get layers of kitchen waste, a little bit of bran, kitchen waste, a little bit of bran, till the bucket is full. The lid then goes on, and that bucket stays for 2 weeks to complete its fermentation. During that time, the collecting and the fermentation time, I have a little spout, a spigot at the bottom of the bucket, which drains something called Bokashi tea, which I dilute and put on my houseplants and put on my plants outside as a kind of a natural fertiliser. When the 2 weeks are up, that bucket's been put to one side for 2 weeks. Of course, I've got 2 buckets. So I start with the second one, carrying on with this process while that first bucket is doing its 2 weeks of fermenting once it's closed.
Ooh, I see.
It's an anaerobic fermentation. So you put the lid on and no air's getting in there. And then after 2 weeks, that Bokashi, which is a Japanese word, is ready to put in soil. In my case, in soil, it can go on a compost bin, and it's accelerated compost to help you with your compost. I don't have the space for compost bins. So my Bokashi then goes into one of my pots that doesn't have any plants in. I dig a big hole. I literally dump the Bokashi in the hole, and I can still, at that point, see what the food was. You know, I can still see bits of eggshells. I can still see, that's a carrot top, or, that's a kind of a peeling of a pepper or something. And I mix it all in. So the soil is in contact with the Bokashi, and the Bokashi is in contact with the soil. And then I leave it. And you can leave it, I leave mine for 6 weeks at least. You can't plant in it straight away because it's too acidic at that stage. But after 6 weeks, basically that's broken down. And so when I started this last year, I did that, and it has enabled me this year to not get any more compost at all, to not have to buy any soil for my garden at all. I've got refreshed, renewed soil that's full of nutrients. And the vegetables, this is why I think we talked about it on one of the other podcasts, the vegetables that I've been getting from that Bokashi infused soil have been amazing. My beetroots, I was just using them as chard for the first, like, I don't know, for about 8 weeks before I took the beetroot out. I was just getting loads and loads and loads of chard. And then my beetroots are huge and they taste amazing. My carrots are better. All of the vegetables that have grown in that soil this year have been far better than the vegetables that I grew the last year. And I spent no money on it at all. No money on that soil. The Bokashi itself sits underneath my counter. The buckets sit under my counter because they're sealed. They don't have any smell. They don't cause me any problems. I don't have to take my waste and put it elsewhere, which is what I was doing before, is taking it out to a kind of a town organic recycling place. It's all just, it's this wonderful, and you'll hear me talk about Tjasa, when I talk with Tjasa later on, the lady who knows about this stuff incredibly. It's this wonderful cycle that, I'm growing my veg, and then parts of my veg are going back in my Bokashi, and then that's fermenting, and then that is going back in my soil, and then I'll grow some veg, and then I'll do the same thing. I've got this sort of life cycle in my kitchen that is closed and wonderful, and just it's brought me so much joy the last year and a bit to see where my waste is going, to know that I'm doing good things with it, to know that it's a fermentation process, which is just fascinating and amazing, and that it's back in my garden, and all that lovely, green shining foliage that's sticking out above the soil is getting all the nutrients from that Bokashi. It's just, it's absolutely wonderful, and that's why I wanted to do an episode on it.
Well, I was really stoked when we started talking about it, and you had said, well, Andrea, you have chickens, so maybe you wouldn't use one. But I was like, yeah, but I want that Bokashi tea. So then the more I started thinking about it, for one, like you said, when you're in town, what you have to, like, either out here you can get special compost trash bin, and then everything just sits there and goes to some municipal composting type thing. So you're not even getting the use of that waste. When you go to a farmer's market and you're carrying home your veg or whatever, it's kind of nice to know that every little scrap that you got is going into your property in some way. But also, I remember when we lived in Virginia talking to the farmer, and he was saying how people buy these bags of compost that are, in his opinion, they're already inert. They're dead. And he was like, a lot of times that compost isn't even really living soil. A lot of times when you buy industrial compost, excuse me, what is that called? Then they include like human waste, which isn't the end of the world, except for the fact that most humans are consuming pharmaceuticals. And then the pharmaceuticals turn up in the compost. And I was like, oh, that's
the biggest problem I had with buying compost was that it's all got peat in it. In the UK, there's really been a big push to have peat-free compost. But when I spoke to the gentleman at the garden centre here in Italy, he was like, peat-free? What are you talking about? Well, obviously he didn't say that. He didn't have a slightly Cockney English accent. He said it in Italian.
Peat-free?
But he didn't know what I was talking about. And I just like, I don't want to buy compost that's got peat in it. Peat is such an incredible carbon sink. And it's just horrible. So that is wonderful. The company called Teraganix in the US sells the exact Bokashi bins that I use. Now, when I first researched, you can make Bokashi bins yourself. You can get old buckets, you can drill holes in the bottom, you can put something underneath to catch the tea, you can find a lid, you can do all this yourself. And I did look
Right.
for some time into how to do that. And in the end, I just thought, I can't do it. This is going to be in my house.
Yeah.
And if there's a chance that I do it wrong and the smell of fermenting food waste is going to be in my kitchen, it's just going to be a disaster and I'll have spent hours on it. I'm going to go to the people who know what they're doing and have been developing this product for many years. And so that's what I did. And I'm glad I did, because the tea comes out like a dream. I just turn the little knob, the tea comes out, and there's never been any issue with smell at all. So this company, Teraganix, who are in the US and Canada, cover those two territories, have these Bokashi buckets. And their site is teraganix.com, Teraganix. We'll put links in the show notes. And they're giving listeners to the podcast 10% discount on the Bokashi bins. And also, if you go on there, you'll be amazed about kind of EM and what it does and the other products like they sell. So that 10% discount is available for any of the products on their website, including
that's awesome.
the Bokashi bin. The coupon code, the discount code that you use, you can just go to that website, and when you go to the checkout, put in the code AKP, all caps, stands for Ancestral Kitchen Podcast, AKP, and that will give you automatically your 10% discount. If you want to look for the bins that I particularly am using, I've got the Essential Bokashi Compost Starter Kit, which is 2 bins that are 4.4 gallons each and a bag of bran. And that's all that you need to do a kind of a non-stop ferment of your kitchen waste, because while one's fermenting for 2 weeks, you fill up the second one, then you empty that first one into your garden, and then you start with the first one again. So with that, you can do this continually through the year. And if you don't have enough space for that Bokashi in your garden, like me, you can give it to a local garden or a friend or your mum or anyone,
or whoever you're shopping from at the
garden.
farmer's market. I can tell you right now, they go crazy for it.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's the one I'm getting, is the 2 bins. It's not here yet, but that's what I'm getting, is the 2 bins. So for somebody to understand these like 3 terms you threw out there real quick, Bokashi is a Japanese word for basically compost. So Bokashi
compost
is kind of what you're producing.
Yeah, that's correct.
The bins are the crock that you're fermenting in.
Yeah, correct.
And the EM, or the bran that you referred to, is kind of like koji rice, where it's like...
Yeah, it's something that's been grown on a bran rather
some
than...
kind of a carb that carries the bacteria on it.
Yeah.
And can stay dry and can stay in a bag, and you can sprinkle it in to re-inoculate. So it's kind of your SCOBY, if you will.
Correct.
That you just keep adding in. So just so people understand, because I was so confused when you first started talking about it. I was like, what?
Once you start going with it, it's like riding a bicycle. You're like, oh, how was I ever confused by this?
How did I ever? I know. I'm so excited too, because so for people to know, Alison was explaining this to me, and I was like, Alison, this is amazing. And then we started talking about, like, could we get like a discount code for the podcast and stuff like that. So then we actually asked, I think were the one who found out, Alison, who was distributing in the US, because that was whoever I was going to have to go to. So it's this product and this branded brand that each country can have somebody who ships it out there. And in the usually if you find stuff in the US, it's like the US and Canada, because we're pretty similar in terms of shipping. So we asked them if we could interview them, and we did 2 times. So the first one, Alison, was just you and me asking her a bunch of questions, and then we asked her, is there somebody like scientific who wants to be recorded? And she said, yeah, interview Tjasa. She's like it. So then we recorded that one. But when we first talked to Carolyn, I was interested to see how I could use it on the farm. I don't think she knew I had a farm when we first started talking, but right away I started hearing her say things, and I was like, I immediately knew where I could apply it. So when she was saying, oh yeah, because I didn't realize there was bran until we were talking to her, and she goes, yeah, you sprinkle this bran on it. And I was like, wait a minute. Immediately I was like, I could put that on the ground in the chicken pen, right? And she was like, oh yeah, of course, because it breaks down and the birds can eat it and it's good for them because it's got the lactobacillus, like you said, and it's good for their gut and they can peck at it. But it will also, I was thinking, because we basically compost in our chicken pen because we put down bedding, and then instead of removing the bedding, sometimes I sprinkle a little snack on it for the birds. Sometimes I don't. They're pretty good about scratching it up no matter what. But then I'll sprinkle on additional layers. And as they continue to scratch and poop and scratch and poop, then the bottom layers start to break down, literally turns into like crumbling soil on the bottom. So I was like, oh, I could sprinkle that in the chicken pen and start breaking things down. And so she's sending us some of that. And then she was talking about using it in compost piles because we don't have like a really, I don't want to use the word official, but like we don't go, okay, here's a layer of green, here's a layer of brown.
Yeah.
It's more like, here's some junk, go throw it on the compost pile.
Yeah.
And so it's what you might call a very slow moving compost pile. And she said, take that bran and like shove it into the middle of the pile and it will start to work its way out and break down the pile. And I was like, I feel like my whole life changed because the composting has almost been like our Achilles heel in a way because we want to use stuff in the garden. And Alison, we have bought compost. We got it by the dump truck load, but we have bought compost. And I don't know if anybody else experienced this, but in the US, there was basically 2020 and 2021, probably 2022 also, but I didn't buy any. There's this like compost crisis. Every farm that I know out here, and then I've heard about it on like the Market Garden podcast and just tons of other podcasts, people mentioned that everybody went bonkers for gardening out here in the US. And because they're like, oh, I'm home. It's 2020. I work from home. I'm a gardener now, which is great. I think that's what we should be doing. So I'm not bashing that. Like, this is exactly what we want people to be doing. But soil and compost manufacturers couldn't keep up. So they were selling compost that was coming out with like chunks of garbage in it, like steaming huge chunks of wood. It was like blazing hot, burning hot, acidic, still in process compost. It was like a year from being done. And we had a truckload of that dumped in our garden and it didn't work at all, obviously, because it needed like another year of composting. But it was already, I was like, oh my gosh. And the garden or the farm where I got the beef from that I mentioned earlier and we get our veggies from and stuff, she was showing me her greenhouse. She was like, look what happened to our plants. Like, it was just horrible. Everybody had a hard time. So it made me like, you didn't want to carry the bags. You didn't want to have to buy it every year. I don't want to have to buy it every year either. I don't have the bag situation, but it made me realize, like, when we farmers can't get our compost, it's an immediate problem. And of course, we should be doing compost piles. I think we should be doing composting all over, little piles everywhere, deal with your leaves and sticks and, stuff like that, chicken manure. But with the Bokashi, I just felt like, oh my gosh, there's so much more I can do. And it's so much faster.
I'm really excited
it's not
to see.
as scientifically complicated for me, the end user.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see what happens in your space with it and what you think of having in your kitchen, because I think you're going to adapt to it like super quickly because it's so.
I already know I am.
It's just so easy. It's just so easy.
We already have a 5-gallon bucket by the back door where we throw scraps and then they eventually go out to the birds. But the birds don't even actually eat all the scraps. Like, they don't love any peels, like melon peels, squash peels, onion peels. They're not into that. They can't have avocado. They can't have citrus. So they don't get that. They're not going to eat grape stems. Like there's a fair amount of stuff that, sometimes it goes on the compost pile. Sometimes just ends up in the yard somewhere. I'm like, oh, that's great. Now there's like black banana peels in the yard. But anyway, sorry, I'm interrupting you. I'm just very excited.
Well, I'll tell you what else I'm excited about. Having spoken to Teraganix, they offered us a set of the essential 2 buckets that we were talking about. This one that I've got as a giveaway for this episode. So if you are in the US or Canada and you would like to enter the draw to get 2 of those compost bins and a bag of EM brand shipped to your door for free, then either head over to our Instagram. If you're listening in real time, this is if you're listening in November 2022, hop over to either of our Instagrams or sign up for my mailing list. And there will be a giveaway this week, which will be open until the 29th of November, I think, where you can get your name in the hat for getting one of those. And nice. I do hope that as the podcast goes on and time and resources allow, we will be able to find distributors for the Bokashi in Europe and Australia and the UK as well, and hopefully offer the same 10% discount on those suppliers. We've started with the one in the US and Canada, because we've got a lot of listeners over your side of the pond, but hopefully we'll be able to extend it. And I know there are suppliers in Europe and Australia and the UK, so it's not something that you can't do. I mean, I got my buckets here, no problem at all. So yeah, not only do we have the discount, but we have a giveaway as well, which is and it's $126 worth of giveaway, which is not insignificant, and I'm quite proud of that. I'm excited for our listeners. That someone's
and if you're listening later, and you're just going to use the discount code, then send me and Alison a message so we can be excited with you, because I'm super stoked about it. And I mean, I don't even know how much we've spent on bringing compost in, maybe $900 or something. And if we could just ferment this stuff every day, and just every 2 weeks, somebody's taking it up and pouring it. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Plus my infamously withering Christmas cactus would probably love it.
I saw a picture of that this week.
Yeah, poor thing. All right. Do we want to roll the tape with Tjasa? Because that was a really good conversation, and it helped me understand the science a lot better.
Yeah, so she is literally was involved in the design of these buckets and has gone all over the world sharing the method and how it works with people. So
you can
she
tell
really was
when you listen to
the one to talk to. So yeah, let's head over to that interview.
All right.
So I am here with Tjasa Ban. Hi, Tjasa. Thank you very much for coming onto the podcast to talk to us.
Thank you for inviting me.
So Tjasa is a Bokashi whiz who currently is working for Teraganix, who is the company who sells the Bokashi buckets we've been talking about in this episode, and they sell much more. Go over to their site and have a look. But Tjasa also used to work for Tjasa, which is the company that design and make the Bokashi system that I use myself. And I remember when I first came across Bokashi, I was just overwhelmed by what it was, what was involved, how it worked. So I wanted to get Tjasa on to fire some questions at her, because she's the expert, and hopefully demystify everything and simplify the world of fermented kitchen waste for all of us. So are you ready for me to fire the questions at you, Tjasa?
Of course I am.
Thank you. So first one, simple question. What is Bokashi?
So Bokashi, actually, the term means that it's a Japanese word for fermented organic matter or fermented organic mass. But also Bokashi is also a process, composting method, that's an anaerobic process, and it's fermentation. So the benefit of Bokashi compared to traditional composting is we are actually using organisms, we are fermenting the food, and we are also speeding up the process.
Okay. And the thing that's kind of fundamental to that fermentation, as I learned, is something called EM. Can you explain to us what EM is, first of all, and then how it works in Bokashi?
Of course. So EM stands for Effective Microorganisms. They were discovered or developed by Dr. Higa. He was actually a professor at the university in Japan. And that means that those are natural microbes and bacteria that are found in the environment. and they together form a colony or like microbiomes, and they're key to good personal and environmental health. Why are they crucial for Bokashi composting is because they're actually the ones that start the fermentation process. So EM or effective microorganisms, you can find them in the soil. They help improve the soil. They make nutrients more accessible to your plants. That is very important when you put the compost or the Bokashi mass in the ground. And also they increase the number of diversity of microbes in the soil and speed up the decomposition process.
Okay. Can you explain how those microorganisms are put into the Bokashi? Because I remember thinking at the beginning, do I spray them on? How do they get in there?
We have something that is called Bokashi bran. So that is the environment in which Bokashi, basically effective microorganisms live in, and you just sprinkle it on. So basically how you use the Bokashi bucket is that you put on a layer of organic waste, usually that in the kitchen that is food. Then you put a layer of Bokashi bran, a layer of organic waste, and basically just keep it closed. And it's, like I mentioned before, anaerobic process. And basically it starts the fermentation process inside of the bucket.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of talk about that, keeping it closed, because I remember before I bought the buckets, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to have this fermentation of waste matter in my house all the time. And I was worried that it was going to smell. But I have to say, literally, the lid of the bucket, it sort of clicks on all the way around, and I cannot smell anything, despite all this amazing fermentation happening right underneath where I chop my vegetables and close to where I eat my food. There is no smell coming from them at all, which I think is wonderful.
Yes, it's an airtight lid. Because the process needs to be airtight. And also, if we forget our organic waste in a normal bucket, open bucket, it starts rotting. And we usually think of that smell. And it's completely different. It's not that smell. This is a fermentation process. Think about beer, for example.
Yeah, completely. When I open the bucket, very often I smell really sweet smells, like the sort of smell I would smell from, some fermented vegetables or some fermented grains that I've got going on in my kitchen. It's lovely. Okay. Before we have your interview here on the podcast, I've talked with Andrea a little bit about how I'm using Bokashi in my kitchen. Now, I'm living in an apartment, and I've got a small kitchen and a very small garden that is container only. But a lot of people who listen to the podcast are right at the other end of the scale from me household-wise. They have large setups like homesteads, and they have grounds, and they already have a compost bin going outside, which I don't, because I don't have room for. How can someone who already has that set up and already has a compost bin and has a large property use Bokashi? Because I don't know that side of it, because I'm coming from the small end. Can you explain that to us?
Of course. Bokashi buckets, they come in very different varieties. You can have in your kitchen a larger bucket. You can have a smaller bucket. Basically, Bokashi as a bucket is just something that helps you collect and ferment organic matter in your kitchen. And we think that we produce a lot of food and a lot of organic matter, but actually the fermentation itself reduces the volume of organic waste up to 25%. So you can actually fill it up for quite a while. And then if you have a traditional compost outside, you can put Bokashi on that traditional compost and additionally treat it, because the fermented mass that you get outside of the bucket, it's called pre-compost. So it's not exactly compost yet. So you have different ways how to treat it. One is with traditional compost. The second option is especially if you have a large garden, if you have a big property, you can go and you can see what parts need to be more fertilized. You can dig a hole, you can put it in the hole in the soil, and then after like 14 days it completely decomposes and you have organic matter with microbes that will do the work for you in the soil. So basically, the bigger the property, the more you can use bokashi, because small apartments, if they have like a small garden, then maybe you will have one full bokashi or bokashi bucket every month. And your garden needs just maybe 2 bokashi buckets per year. So sometimes people then put it in organic waste, or they use it, they give it to their neighbors, their family, and so on. So the bigger the property, the more you can use.
Yeah, I agree with you. So we've got 2 buckets, and for my little garden with my containers, I just use 2 buckets because I can't move all of the plants. Some of them are, small trees, so I can't move them every year. So really, with the containers that have my annuals in and my vegetables, 2 buckets are enough for me to fill up the small containers I have. And so now what I'm looking for is, where else, like you said, can I give my bokashi to? There's a local community garden, and I'm hoping that I can carry on making bokashi through the year, because it's so easy, and it feels to me like a better thing to do with my waste than put it in the kind of council municipal organic bin. So I'm hoping I can send it to them. And it's interesting what you say about the larger properties, because I automatically think, oh, they're going to have a compost, they're going to put their waste in there. But your idea of, well, there might be a bit of the property that really is not so fertile or hasn't produced so well. So actually, just like I'm doing in my containers, you can dig a hole in there and put the bokashi straight into the ground and leave it, and that will rejuvenate that particular area, as well as then you've got the option to put it in the compost as well. What does it do to the compost? Does it speed up the compost? Does it change the fermentation of the compost? Do the EM bacteria kind of proliferate in the compost? What happens?
It will a little bit speed up the traditional composting. Actually, the process itself, because it's not anaerobic anymore, so the compost will not ferment anymore. It will start doing the normal heating compost process, but you still have those microbes that are taking care of the environment, so they're making sure that you don't get any bad microbes in. With open traditional compost, it's very easy to actually get access of bad microbes. So like we know E. coli, salmonella, and stuff like that. So what EM does is they kind of neutralize, or like they're fighting the pathogen microbes. So basically EM, if you put it there, it will help make the environment healthier, a little bit speed up the process, but there won't be no fermentation anymore. So we're just making different, it goes back to traditional composting. But they don't interfere with each
I
other.
Understand,
and
it kind of enriches.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. And of course, the other thing is the bokashi tea, the stuff that comes out of the bottom. Now, my 2 bokashi buckets make so much tea that I can't keep up with it. I'm feeding my house plants with it, and I'm feeding my vegetables and my plants outside with it. But you need so little of it to have a big impact. And so I'm then using the rest, and I'm pouring it into my drains, because it's then introducing those EM goodies into my drains around my house as well. And if I had a bigger property, I would be able to use that tea to make a drench or a feed for all of my vegetables for the whole place. At the moment I've got so much of it, I can't keep up with it. Okay. Talk to us about the rules and how it works, because I also remember at the beginning thinking, can I put this in? Can I put that in? And there are some benefits to bokashi. You can put things in it that you can't put in a traditional compost. So can you explain the process and what the rules and what you can put in are?
Yes. The most optimal way to use bokashi is that you cut larger pieces of food waste into smaller ones. You can put in basically all the food waste. You can also put in some food leftovers, but it's not the optimal that you put processed food in it, but you can also put some part of that. Definitely vegetables, definitely fruits. You said you produce a lot of liquid. That means you're using a lot of fresh vegetables and fruits, like just the peels and the leftovers. So you could put in dairy, you could put in the citruses. You cannot put that on traditional compost. It's not advised because they can have a lot of pesticides. You can put in meat. That's also one thing that's not put in traditional compost, because especially chicken meat can have salmonella, and then you contaminate the whole compost. You can put that in bokashi because you have microbes that are basically pulling on the good side, I would say. And bones, they will not decompose. You could put small bones in, but not advised. They're not going to decompose in the fermentation process. And you can also put in fish. So as I mentioned before, you put in a layer. That means you prepare breakfast, you put in a layer. You put in a layer of bokashi bran, you close it, you keep it airtight. You have to ensure that there are anaerobic conditions. And then again, you prepare lunch, you put in another layer of organic waste or food waste, another layer of bokashi, and so on and so on and so on. And the fermentation process starts right away. So with the first layer of organic waste and bokashi, the fermentation process starts. And you can fill it up for weeks, or me, when I lived alone, for basically months before it was actually full. But you have to drain the bokashi liquid regularly. So usually it takes like 5, 6, 7 days for the first drops of liquid to come out, and then just every few days just check, drain the liquid. And as you mentioned, you can use liquid as a fertilizer, so you can dilute it with water and water your plants, your garden, grass outside. And the extra liquid you can use as a drain cleaner.
Yeah, which is what I do. So, yeah, basically the only thing that I don't put in is my big bones. So very often I make stock with my bones, and some of the little chicken bones, they're virtually broken down because I've had them in the pot for a day cooking. And so some of the little ones I put in, but my big bones I still put in the municipal kind of waste, organic waste. We don't really have much leftover food. We tend to eat everything, but sometimes I've got a little bit of leftover cooked food. So sometimes I put that in. But I put in, I'm putting in eggshells every day. I'm putting in vegetables. I'm putting in fruit. I'm putting all my peelings. I'm putting in all the wastes from tea. I make loose tea quite a lot. And so when I've strained my tea through a tea strainer, I squash the water out of it, and then I'll put my tea leaves and my kind of bits of herbs that I've made my tea with in there as well. I think it's quite surprising to people who are used to doing compost only that, you can put the meat in there and you can put the dairy in there. And it means that you've got far less waste. Virtually everything from my kitchen goes into my bucket. It's just wonderful. What I wanted to also say was I've got a little kind of container on my surface. So I put my waste into there, and then maybe once a day I empty that into my bucket, and then I cover it with the bokashi. And the buckets come with a kind of a pusher. So you push it down, and what you're saying is completely true. It reduces in size. So I'm putting the layers in. I'm thinking, perhaps it might be full next time. But by the time I come back to it, I push down, my new waste that I've put in, and it really does reduce underneath. So you can get far more in the bucket than you think you can, because all that fermentation is happening and the liquid's coming out and it's reducing in size, which is lovely to see. Okay, when I looked on the Tjasa YouTube channel, and you told me about a video on there, which was set in Dubai with a community using the bokashi. And actually the lady in there does the same thing. She has like the bokashi daily, where she puts her scraps in and then she puts them in her bin. And I know personally you've got a lot of experience all over the world using Bokashi. How do you see, from the projects that you've been involved in, Bokashi making a difference to the current crisis we have around climate and food?
Yes. It goes all the way to waste management problems, food crisis. Right now, as much as 34% of mixed municipal waste is organic waste, and about 60% of that is food waste. And you would be surprised, the food waste is not coming from restaurants. Actually, it mostly comes from households. Which is really, really concerning because it comes directly from us, from consumers, but it also means that we can do something about it. Right now, most of the organic waste is not handled properly, which means it ends up in landfills. When it starts decaying, you have like a lot of organic material that produces greenhouse gases. And so on. So this is like a really big problem. And if we want to solve this problem, we need to start at the source. And as I said before, the source of organic waste is actually our household. Mm-hmm. And Bokashi helps you with that because right in the kitchen, when you are producing the food waste, you can put it directly in Bokashi. You can already process it. And then you have different options how to use it. You can either use it in your garden, so you are making your own closed loop. So you got food, you produce food waste, you turn it into a resource, you turn it into a compost, you use it in your garden, it helps you produce and grow more food. So you're closing the loop in your own household. But not everyone has that option. Sometimes we produce more than we can use. Sometimes we live in condos, apartments. We don't have any, we don't have garden. We don't have any green land or anything where we can actually use it. We don't have the soil. In that case, we worked with a lot of cities or like projects where they actually set up either a community composting, either a waste pickup, like curbside compost pickup, and you can join community composting. You can basically get a subscription for waste pickup, and then it's additionally treated to compost, and they usually bring it to farms, and then they have basically compost again to produce organic fertilizer and then organic food. So you can close a loop in a community. So that's how we see that Bokashi is actually helping with current climate or food crisis or even waste management crisis. So that's wonderful. Closing the food loop.
I didn't know that. I knew the levels of food waste and how much of it comes from home. But, when it is taken away, when it leaves our house, it's easy for us to forget that we don't know what happens to that waste. And we don't know if it actually is recycled. We don't know where it ends up. It's gone from our lives. And it's easy to not take responsibility for that. But that's what's got us into the crisis that we're in now, really. So it's wonderful that, I'm seeing that closed loop that you talk about in my garden. I'm eating things that I've grown, and then I'm chopping them, putting them in Bokashi. I'm letting it ferment, and then I'm putting it back in my soil so I don't have to buy new soil, and then it's growing vegetables that I'm chopping and putting back in the Bokashi. It's a wonderful circle. But then to take that wider, as you're talking about, where curbside pickups and community kind of composting, and then that going to farms, so then farms get the benefits of all those microorganisms from their local community, and they need to use less inputs. And also the waste is not going into landfill. It just makes complete sense to me. I think the whole world should be doing this. I think you agree, don't you?
Yeah, we totally agree.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah, and also it's making it convenient. You're not just doing something good. Actually, Bokashi is convenient in the kitchen. Reduces the food waste. You don't have to throw your food waste out every second day. It doesn't smell. You can use it as You can use the liquid. It just makes everything more pleasant. Like the cleaning of your food waste is just more pleasant because there's no rotting, there are no flies, no worms forming.
Yeah, completely. It's a win-win. Is there anything else that you want to share that you think we haven't covered that's important to talk about?
Well, I think we pretty much covered how Bokashi works, why EM is important. We covered how we're closing the Bokashi loop. And yes, maybe, as I already mentioned, we are addressing two problems at the same time and also making a convenient solution. So we're addressing the food crisis that we need to produce more healthy food, I would say. Not just food, but we're talking about healthy food without using excessive fertilizers and herbicides and pesticides and all the chemicals. And on the other side, we're basically turning food waste, which is a big problem, it's a big percentage of our waste, into a new resource. So we're closing the loop.
Wonderful. Thank you ever so much for sharing your experience, Tjasa. I really wish you much kind of luck and energy and fortitude to go forward and take Bokashi even further. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
That was great, Alison. It was a good interview.
Yeah, she just knows so much. She's so enthusiastic, particularly about how you can, outside the home, it starts in the home. But like we said before the interview, if you've got a lot of this stuff and you haven't got the room for it, you can start sharing it. And it's amazing to think about the possibilities for Bokashi in our own homes, but also for the world.
I know. You asked really good questions, and I hadn't even thought about when you got to the end and you're kind of like big scope, And it is true, though, like so many things where we always say we're changing the world one plate at a time or whatever. And all these really big, grandiose things do come down to just individuals wanting to and doing things differently. And this is just one of them, because when I heard her interview and then when we talked to Carolyn, of course, I was thinking about our interview with Nicolette Hahn-Nyman and reading her book and thinking about the mycelium and, I don't have cows, like I don't have cows on grass right now. And so these are all ways that we're contributing to that huge grand picture of just like nature being supported and improved,
So when you get your bins, I want to see what's happening with your bins.
Yeah.
Will you share?
What I was thinking was, so on your Instagram, you have the Bokashi highlights. So
that's right.
If somebody's listening, you could go to Instagram.com/ancestral_kitchen. That's Alison's personal Instagram. It's where I met you. Back when you had like 30 followers.
Yeah.
And me and my 5 accounts were 5 of them. Now you're the big leagues, Alison. But
not yet.
If you go there, look in Alison's highlights, and she's got the Bokashi there, so you can kind of see it. And then when mine comes, I'm going to take pictures as well, so you guys can see what's going on.
Great.
I'll post it in my stories, and I'll save it to highlights, because I know you and Alison, you and I both, like, we really make a good effort not to be on every single day, which means we miss good stuff sometimes. So
indeed,
I try to make sure that if I'm posting something that I really want people to be able to get, that I save it somewhere, like a recipe or something.
if you want to see the picture of my beetroot, go into my story highlight.
They're huge.
Because they are there.
If you want to see the picture of the beetroot I pulled out of our crappy compost this year, you can't, because I fed it to the chickens. It was very pathetic. But maybe I should have got a picture so I could compare.
Yeah, we could do a big beetroot, small beetroot thing.
Before, after.
Yeah.
Gosh.
If you're as excited as we are about the Bokashi and you want to get yourself some buckets, remember you've got a 10% discount from the podcast. The code is AKP, all caps, and the website is Teraganix, Teraganix.com. And if you are listening to this in November and 2022 and you want to enter our competition to win a set of 2 essential bins, then head over to our Instagram or sign up to my mailing list. The closing date for that will be the 29th. And like Andrea said before, when you get your bin, send us some pictures.
Yes.
Let us know what you're putting in it. And then next year, or however long it takes for your growing season to turn around, send us a picture of your big beetroot too.
Yeah. Or just send us a picture of your Christmas cactus coming back to life.
Yeah, that would be nice. With the Bokashi tea.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was thinking my houseplants are going to immediately benefit from this.
Yeah, no, mine are too. Mine are definitely. They're improving having that as a drink. And it's just a win-win everywhere. It really is.
Yeah. Everybody loves ferments. Humans love them, animals, plants. It's good for us. It's just a process that makes things so bioavailable and in that sense more nutrient dense for us. So yeah.
Well, this was a fun episode. Thank you for coming along on the Bokashi exploration I started 18 months ago.
Yeah, well, I'm glad I finally understand, because all the like terms kind of were throwing me off a bit. I was like, what? So this is fantastic.
Cool. Okay, well, I'll speak to you next time, Andrea.
Okay, Alison. Have a good afternoon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. We'd love to continue the conversation. Come find us on Instagram. Andrea's at Farm and Hearth and Alison's at ancestral_kitchen. Until next time, we both wish you much fun, exploration, and satisfaction in and out of the kitchen.